Welcome to the recording of this Partners 2020 Ask the Expert session for Biological Sciences. Today, Careers Consultant Helen Atkinson will be hosting a conversation with Laura Holland, Director of Communications and Culture at the Rosalind Franklin Institute. Laura will be first going through a presentation of her career before Helen leads her in a Q&A with some questions submitted by you, the partner students. Without further ado, we'll pass over to Laura, who's going to talk you through her career journey.
Right, so I'm Laura Holland. I'm going to talk about my experiences in my career outside of science, but next to it, career adjacent to science, I guess. I am from the Northeast originally, so I was born in Widgerton, went to school there, first and middle school, and then went to high school in Morpeth. Went to King Edward's school there, which is a state school. And I did all the usual GCSEs and then A-levels in maths, biology and chemistry. So I was science inclined. I think even when I was doing my A-levels, I knew that although I really loved science and wanted to pursue it, I probably wasn't a scientist, and I certainly wasn't a mathematician. But they were still my favourite subjects, and that enjoyment that I got from studying it was really what was driving me rather than any thoughts of careers in particular. I went on to do an undergraduate degree in cell biology at Durham, which actually started out as a degree in molecular biology, but after the first year I realised that actually the balance of courses wasn't quite right for me, so was really enjoying a lot of the plant biology, a lot of the genetics and the health related topics, but was less enjoying the chemistry, which is a really strong feature of molecular biology. So I actually switched degree route after the end of my first year, which was surprisingly easy to do. And I think looking at, I wouldn't have thought that, and I wouldn't have expected that going into my undergraduate degree, that it was possible to make a change, because it felt like a big decision between molecular biology and cell, but actually it was trivial at the end of my first year. So I switched on to that cell biology route, which I absolutely loved. At the end of my undergraduate degree, I knew that I wasn't quite done, I guess is the best way of saying it, but didn't want to commit to a PhD at that point. So I switched over to a postgraduate degree at Newcastle. So I moved down to Newcastle, where I studied molecular bioscience, or medical and molecular bioscience, where I had a fantastic time. Real highlight was getting a proper scientific publication out of my master's, which is reasonably unusual. Worked with a really good supervisor who was very keen to publish the results of our work, and that research that I was doing was actually neither molecular nor medical. It was actually in the field of science communication, and looking at the reporting of health from a scientific perspective. So how different health messages are portrayed to different groups in society. So looking at the impact of socioeconomic inequality, I guess, on the health information that people get. And that linked a little bit to the job that I had when I was an undergraduate. So the summer job that I had when I was at Durham was actually in Newcastle, working at the Centre for Life. I was a science explainer. So talked to families about science, ran workshops for kids about science, lots of different topics, became an expert on dinosaurs, which had nothing to do with cell biology. And I absolutely adored that job. So I didn't go down the route of summer internships and placements with big companies. I didn't look to do planned work experience in the lab in all of my summers, but first, second and third year, I went and worked at Life. So it wasn't the kind of traditional summer internships, but in terms of career preparation was absolutely incredible. And I think you do feel that pressure from the first days at university to map out what you're going to do in your summers in your first, second, third year. If you don't go down that route of internships here, there and everywhere that leads onto a graduate scheme, that's okay, that's fine. I think that work experience that you get is vital, but it doesn't have to be down those traditional routes necessarily. When I was doing my postgrad, when I was doing my MRes, I got lots more career experience, in fact some at Newcastle University itself. So I worked in as an enterprise intern, which was a new scheme that they were running. We were one of the first cohorts there. Hi. welcome. And that enterprise intern job was brilliant. So I got to meet lots of people in the university. I got to figure out how universities work. I learned lots and lots about higher education that I would never have found about otherwise. And I think I didn't even realize that those internal jobs existed. I was a receptionist, so jobs that you do for money but provide you with an unbelievable amount of skills. So working on the front line in a health setting gave me lots of customer service skills and lots of skills for dealing with difficult or tricky customers that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I made a failed attempt at waitressing that's soonest ignored. So at the end of that would have been a natural stepping point to move into a PhD. That would have been the obvious thing, and in fact had a couple of routes into PhDs that I was looking at. Decided not to do that, but that would have been the entry point to a fairly traditional research career that would have taken you through PhD, PDRA. The idea is that you then progress into group leader and then on to be professor, and world domination follows thereafter. That very linear looking career didn't appeal, and it doesn't appeal to lots of people. And what I didn't realize at the time was just how leaky that career pathway can be. And there's no negative connotations to leaking out at any point prior to PhD, as I did straight after PDRA, that there are numerous options for science trained people right the way through this pipeline if you choose not to follow it to its natural conclusion. So this was the way that I went. The training I received in science communication, largely through my work that I did when I was an undergraduate at Centre for Life, had introduced me to this world of science communication, and the idea that I could talk about science for a living, which took the real genuine enthusiasm and love I have for my topic, and took out all the bits I didn't like being in the lab and breaking expensive bits of equipment, which happened on more than one occasion. So my very first role was as the coordinator for the Newcastle Science Festival, which I ran in from 2005 to 2007, so delivered 2 festivals, which was funded by a regional development agency called One North East that's gone now, but did fund sort of public programs like that at the time. And I also ran their lectures and adult programs, which was brilliant fun. So in that role, I managed a small team. I managed the budget for the festival, booked speakers, ran events, planned the marketing and PR, promoted the festivals to stakeholders, and helped partners plan events. So lots and lots of skills that I'd gathered from, not really from my degree, but from the work that I'd done alongside it. So working in the enterprise team, where we'd done lots of events, doing all of the work in understanding what good science communication looked like at Centre for Life. A lot of it is common sense, and you think that you need special training to do marketing and PR and things, and you don't really. You need to understand who you're talking to and be a reasonably good communicator, but there's no magic trick to it for sure. After that, I decided that I wanted to get back to be closer to research, so to talk more about live science rather than sort of broad topics. And that you realise how many options you have when you think about where research happens. It isn't just in universities. Research happens in industry, which is very highly focused on product delivery, but there's loads of science communication opportunities in industry, both in marketing, science writing, medical writing, communications. All of those will require a science background, and that would have been a good option to pursue there. Loads of SciComm opportunities in universities, all the way from public engagement right the way through to quite business development focused opportunities involving comms. So research in the university is very broad. There are teaching elements to it, so lots of roles around linking up the teaching with the research, and it's grant based, so plenty of opportunities to help scientists earn money, raise money, and report and evaluate it there. Where I ended up was down at these bottom 2, so looking at research institutes and national facilities. Initially, I moved into a national facility, so I'll talk about that in a second. but it's also worth looking at research institutes. So research institutes are very focused in their delivery of research activity. They don't necessarily rely on grants to the same extent, and they do training, not teaching, so they don't have undergraduates. They are a brilliant place if you're interested in either being a researcher or being in a role allied to research, because they do some really exciting stuff, maybe without the constraints of a university, which has to operate in lots of different ways as well. So after I'd finished at Life, I moved down to Diamond Light Source, which is the UK's national synchrotron facility. So it's a type of particle accelerator. It is as big as Wembley Stadium. It's absolutely enormous. One of those things that you think, how did I never knew that existed? But I didn't. I moved down when it was just opening. So 2007 was when it launched, and I joined a small team and was there for long enough to grow with the team. So I took on lots and lots of roles. I started out in outreach and events, then became public engagement manager as that became more of a priority for them. Then became engagement manager with a bigger team underneath me, working not just with the public, but with other audiences and training as well. And then eventually became deputy head of communications. So really, although it looks like I was there for a long time, being opportunistic and taking on work as it came and being open to trying new things out, and the vast majority of these are just common sense as well, gave me lots and lots of new and exciting things to do. Then I moved to my current role, so wanted to get a bit closer back to biology, and this great opportunity came up to be Director of Communications and Culture at the Rosalind Franklin Institute, so again in Oxfordshire, and there I've taken on all sorts of different areas of responsibility, some that I already had and some that are new, in external comms, stakeholder engagement, training and staff development, looking at the values and the behaviours that we want as an organisation, still doing public engagement, that's been a constant thread, and looking at equality and diversity as well. So we're named for a famous woman in science. We have to be not just doing what other people do in diversity, but really trying to lead it as well, which is so interesting and exciting. So I get to add yet more things in and try things out for the first time and give it a go in this fantastic new building and research institute. So that's where I've got to. I think that if I look back at where I was when I started my undergraduate degree, the jobs I'm doing now I didn't know existed. I didn't know that was an option. I wouldn't say I entered science communication by accident, but was really driven by what I loved in the jobs that I did as an undergraduate. In the skills that I learned were as valuable as the research skills I was learning, those communication skills, and they've really led me down some incredibly interesting paths. I get to spend time with leading scientists every day, and help them translate their work for wider audiences, which is brilliant. And yeah, I would if you love science but you're not sure where you want to be in it, I don't think that's a problem. I think there are umpteen possibilities out there that will allow you to be adjacent to it and support it and build that science that you love without having to worry about being in the lab if that's not what lights your fire. So there we go.
Thank you to Laura for that wonderful and insightful presentation. We now take you into the Q&A portion of this session, where Helen will be asking Laura some excellent questions submitted by you.
I suppose that the first thing I just kind of wanted to comment on, I think obviously fantastic that you were able to get that experience at the Centre for Life during the sort of summer vacation periods. When you were sort of searching for summer work experience, did you have a strategy in mind? Were you actively kind of looking for science-related work experience? And could you maybe tell me a little bit about how that came about?
So one of the things that really shocked me about going to university, and I think it's different. I think people going to university now are very different, and they're much more directional than I was. Perhaps I think we drifted into university because it was the thing you were going to do. Well, I met quite a few people in the first term at Durham who had it all planned out. They had a strategy that they knew the 5 firms that they were going to apply for an internship this year. Some were going to plan to go back for another one the year after. You know, they had this incredible strategy, and for most of them that was exactly the path that they followed, and that I was in awe at their direction. I didn't know what an internship was when I went to university. I didn't come from a family that had that had gone down those routes. It was, the whole vocabulary was alien to me. I didn't understand it at all. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't have the resources to go and live in London for 3 months and pursue an internship in that way. So I was looking for jobs that would pay me money that I found interesting. And they were my criteria. I needed a job. I didn't want to work in a bar. I didn't want to work in a shop. So I was looking around around the place that I lived for things that I would find interesting and rewarding, and I was incredibly lucky to find something at Life that came up, but it wasn't part of a strategy, because I wasn't informed enough to have made one at that point. You know, I was definitely not in a privileged enough position to know that you needed that work experience or those internships, or you needed those connections and build that network. And you know, that wasn't where part of my thinking when I started as an undergraduate at all.
Yeah, so it was a bit of a sort of right place, right time. An opportunity came up that wasn't in a bar, was it?
Yeah.
Fantastic. And I suppose one of the things that sort of we always see when we work with science students, I suppose, is that sort of desire to either work within a lab or to do perhaps something completely different. And I suppose as a science student, was there ever a revelation or a moment during your degree when you realised, ideally, I don't really want to pursue that sort of lab-based career? You've obviously spoken about not wanting to pursue PhD, but was there ever a kind of a moment that kind of led you to that decision?
I mean, again, I think going into university, I didn't have a long-term career plan. I knew I loved science, but I didn't imagine myself taking one route over another particularly. What was striking about my cohort at undergraduate level, and particularly the chemists more than the biologists, I think an enormous number of them knew from day one that they didn't want to go into the lab, and part of their plans were to do management consultancy, to do, you know, to take that scientific literacy, and they knew that they were going to transfer out at the first opportunity. I knew I didn't want to do that. I knew that I wanted to, you know, I love my subject, I wanted to stay close to it. That I wanted to do something sciencey, but I wouldn't say I was more specific than that. There was certainly no Damascene moment where I realised that I would do one thing over another. I think it was a journey of sort of picking up skills and understanding my own strengths and weaknesses, and gradually kind of figuring out where I would fit in a landscape, not necessarily having this huge drive to pursue one path over another. That makes me sound very unfocused, doesn't it? I think
but I think that's important to acknowledge, because students and graduates plan for their career in different ways. So like you said, you know, you had friends and people on your course who were very sort of forward thinking, and they had perhaps a more rigid idea of what they wanted to do, and they took steps to pursue that. Whereas for other students, it you know, sometimes it can be a chance conversation that you have, you know, a random thing that you just decide on a whim to apply for. And, you know, there's no right or wrong way to kind of plan for that. I think it's just worth, you know, highlighting that people get to their career and they kind of find out what they love and they want to sort of pursue in very different ways, actually. We've got a question from a student who's asked, you know, how did you find that your degree at Newcastle, so your masters that you did at Newcastle, how do you think that's prepared you for your current role, as well as obviously previous roles that you've done?
So I got a massive amount out of the masters, and I think a lot of that was transitioning from being an undergraduate where teaching happens to you. You know, you're following this very well-trod pathway through the teaching, that you've got to do the assessments that you have to do, you do your dissertation, but you don't really interact with research as it really is. So you're not necessarily going to be producing publications, you're not doing extended periods of open-ended research, you're not setting out in quite the same way your own research plans and activities, or working in collaboration with a supervisor to do that. So I think that understanding what research really looks like was very, very valuable. One of the major things that I took away from Newcastle was not only the work that I did as a student, but the work that I did as an enterprise intern, with getting to know different bits of the university, getting to understand how higher education worked. And again, it sounds really naff, but the transferable skills. So I think although it sounds like I've sort of bumped through my career waiting for things to happen, being opportunistic, so seeing seeing things that you think would be interesting and going for them. And I didn't know the first thing about setting up a business, so becoming an enterprise intern where you're talking to other people about why they should do it seems a bit of a weird one, but I knew I liked making connections and meeting people and learning, and it was just the best fun. We had the best fun in that job with a group of other students. So I think that was, having those opportunities meant as much as the formal learning, I think.
You'd probably be quite pleased to hear that those enterprise intern roles are still around. So yeah, every year we recruit a team of students to work with the career services and startup enterprise interns, and they do similar things to what you did, but hosting events for students that are interested in setting up their own business, meeting graduates who've done the same. So yeah, it's something that sort of continues.
That's so lovely to hear, because we were the very first intake, and I think we worried a bit that we'd killed it in the first year, but
no, you lay the foundations for a really strong programme. I'm going to maybe pivot slightly now and just ask you a few questions about science communication, I suppose, in general. Now, obviously, you pursued a role, working within sort of science communication in a few different organisations, and I suppose for you, if potentially putting yourself in the shoes of a recruiter here, what kind of skills and experience do you look for when you're looking to recruit students, graduates who are perhaps interested in pursuing a career in science communication?
So we've just taken on I've just taken on our team member and recruiting another one into my team at the moment, and the first role was for a comms officer, and we recruited a person who just finished their PhD. So they quite similar to lots of people, they completed their PhD but realized that they'd sort of come to the end of the road in terms of that area of research, didn't want to do a PDRA, but they'd spent a lot of time doing voluntary activities, taking on leadership roles in volunteer groups. They'd worked a lot on doing blogs and translating their research and other people's research for public audiences. So they had demonstrated, although they didn't have work experience in the area, they demonstrated a massive commitment to communicating science as part of their own practice, and I think that was really lovely to see. They had they'd and I would look for that in other roles I've recruited for as well at a more junior level, that it isn't the academic qualifications were not the primary thing I was looking for. It was that the work that they'd done outside of it to build up skills in those areas.
Yeah, and I suppose building on that, you've had the experience working at the Centre for Life during your studies. What kind of advice would you give to students looking to gain experience that's sort of perhaps more linked to science communications, perhaps during their studies, to prepare them?
So thankfully, science communication has got quite a lot of opportunities for people to engage with at an undergraduate or postgraduate level. So there are lots of science festivals all over the country that are always looking for volunteers, usually undergraduate and postgrad volunteers, to help out. You can get experience with there's often local societies, either IOP branches or Royal Society of Chemistry branches, or I believe the Royal Society of Biology has similar structures where they will do science communication and outreach to schools and all sorts of different things. So there are a ton of ways of getting involved and building voluntary experience that really does look impressive. It does stand out, and because they aren't opportunities that you fall over, you have to go looking for them. So people who take those up do stand out. Obviously there are barriers sometimes. If you need to volunteer at the Cheltenham Science Festival, then you need to be able to travel there and help out. But I think certainly in Newcastle there's enough opportunities locally where anyone could get involved and help deliver outreach.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the benefit of students, there's something called Pint of Science that sort of happens across the UK, and there's a branch of this that's based in Newcastle. So a lot of volunteers who sort of work for Pint of Science happen to be Newcastle University students, and they're involved in organising events for sort of the public around the northeast, to sort of come to events and speak to other people that are passionate about science and sort of sharing science. So very much science communication sort of preparation right there. And there are other things that the university offers, so opportunities to to go out into schools and work with science students in schools, as well as opportunities to write for something called React, which is a student-run science magazine. So again, perhaps more in the science writing front. If you're interested in that side of things, there are plenty of opportunities through the university to kind of get you involved in things. Laura, thinking about your current role, tell me a little bit about what's your favourite thing about your role?
I am most enjoying trying things out for the first time. So it's a much broader role than I've had in the past. So we're getting stuck into designing learning frameworks for all of our staff, which isn't something I've done before. We're looking at applying values and culture into our refunding, which is really interesting, thinking about how what we want to be as an organisation will influence the work we do in the future, which is brilliant. I'm loving the EDI work that we're doing, so being able to do some really interesting policy stuff. I like doing new things, you know, I like trying things out for the first time, which is always a bit scary, but it's fun, you know. It's really fun.
It helps develop you as a professional as well, and perhaps gives you the broader skills if you do want to move to something else at a later date.
Yeah, I expect within the next decade to be a fully rounded person.
Fingers crossed. and I suppose, you know, thinking about perhaps the realities of science communication, are there, you know, particular challenges that you faced working in this area, or just during your career in general, that you'd like to share with students?
I wouldn't say challenges. It can feel like quite a small area sometimes, because it is relatively niche. So you can look around and think, I don't know what my next job's going to be. You know, you have to sort of keep the faith a little bit that that something bigger and better will come along, and keep on being opportunistic. I think it can be, you have to love science because you are working with academics, and often you're not working with academics in what they want to do is science, so you often feel like you're kind of pestering people, or you're trying to get information out of people that don't want to give it to you. So you need to be pretty resilient, and you need to have a way with academics. But I don't think there's been big challenges. I think it's been, so I'm a bit of an extrovert. I think finding science communication was definitely finding my people.
You found your tribe, right?
Yeah, it's a really lovely community. There's a really strong community feel to it. So
fantastic. So I guess just a couple of quick questions, just perhaps reflecting back on the first sort of role that you did after graduation. I suppose, what was your job search like? You know, did you apply for a lot of roles and perhaps weren't successful, or were you quite lucky perhaps to find something that you applied for and were successful for quite quickly?
So it was a bit of a weird one, actually. So when I was coming towards the end of my master's, I did apply for lots of things. And there were a few different options. So I applied to a couple of university roles in, I think, fundraising and alumni stuff, I think, back at Durham, and it was sort of in the final couple for a few roles. But then got a phone call out of the blue from my old boss, who knew I was coming to the end of my studies and had a role fall through. So someone they'd recruited hadn't sort of passed their probation, hadn't settled into the role well. So they were looking for someone very quickly, and basically asked me if I wanted it, which was weird and wonderful, really. And I think it again, like most things in my career, the opportunities that I think I've only ever got one job that I've applied for through a traditional route. All of the opportunities I've had have been because of relationships I've built up and networks I've built up. So that was a really strange one, but it wouldn't have come about if I hadn't have had that good relationship and had made my availability known, if that makes sense. So it was a bit of a weird one.
Absolutely. And I think it's really useful for students to hear that from somebody who has actually found opportunities through sort of personal professional connections that you have, because I think we talk about this a lot in our career sessions, and the value of things like LinkedIn, but also sort of making connections and speaking to people working in sectors or organizations which interest you. But I think that can seem quite a daunting, scary prospect if you may be doing it for the first time. I suppose, have you got any advice for students who are maybe thinking about potentially contacting somebody who they don't know? What advice would you give them?
So just that it is terrifying, and you're going to fail more often than you succeed at it, and you do need to be pretty thick-skinned. I think you can't build up a relationship with someone based on nothing, and often just announcing yourself in front of someone is is going to be an uncomfortable experience for both of you. I think those pursuing relationships through real opportunities, through the volunteering at events, through even temp work, those kind of things, that showing your skills in a real sense rather than telling someone what your skills are is probably better. And I've taken on plenty of staff members that I've seen in other capacities with other colleagues or through recommendations or whatever. So just giving yourself lots of opportunities to show what your skills are, not tell people.
Yeah, and just go for it, essentially. Go for it. Yeah.
And even where I've had lots of people have come to me where I haven't been able to give opportunities, I don't feel badly towards any of them. I never resent someone for giving it a go and making an approach that unless it's spelt badly or their mum clearly don't do that. But you don't feel ill will towards people who are just giving it a go. You absolutely do.
Absolutely. And I think for students, it's really important to understand that that's what the career service is here to help you with. So if you want some help trying to find people working in a particular organisational sector that interests you, you can get in touch with us and we can point you in the right direction. Similarly, we can even look over draft emails or messages that you'd like to send to people and give you feedback on that. So you're not completely alone when you're trying to reach out to people that don't, you don't know. There's a lot of support available through the university to help you with that.
And I think that failing softly, because like I said at the start, my family background, I didn't have a group of no one in my family works in science. I was the first scientist ever. I didn't have a network to fall back on there or people to sound ideas off. So you can feel really lonely, particularly when there's, you come into university and everyone else seems to have a plan. So I think definitely taking advantage of those services. And I did some shocking interviews, some really, really terrible ones that you learn from. So don't be frightened of doing a bad interview. It's not gonna come back and haunt you unless you do something criminal during it. Just allowing yourself to go for as many opportunities as you can and learning from it if it doesn't go great, and taking the advice that's there. I think that's so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Took the words right out of my mouth there, Laura. Okay, so I suppose perhaps one last question, if you'd be sort of happy to answer this one. So I suppose, considering your time, Laura, at university and your own career, what is the one piece of advice that you would like to give to students?
I think the most useful thing that I've ever done is taking opportunities as they present themselves, and not being worried that it doesn't fit into other people's expectations of what career path you should take, or not being worried if it doesn't feel like there's an obvious outcome for you at that moment, but it looks like an interesting thing to do. Just take those opportunities as they come, look for them, be proactive in looking for them, and grasp them.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Laura, for your time.
That's all right.
Thank you for tuning in to this recording of the Partners 2020 Ask the Expert session for biological science. We give our biggest thanks to Helen for hosting this session, and for Laura for being an excellent guest, providing such wonderful insight into her own career. If you want to stay up to date with future insight from alumni and industry professionals, remember to subscribe to the Newcastle Careers Service YouTube channel, and you can follow us at NCL Careers on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. We hope to see you in September. Best of luck and take care.